They say the resume tells the story, but what if it doesn't? What if the real key to success isn't the credentials, but the character? Today, we're diving into that question with David Cohen, founder of DS Cohen and Associates, a global leadership consultancy that's helping organizations across 5 continents see beyond the resume and hire for what truly matters: values, behavior, and heart. I always found it strange writing a resume because I was literally amping up all of my qualifications. But when it came down to it, it was the in person interview that changed everything, whether I got the job or not. The resume got me in the door, but I feel like I got myself the job by being who I am. So today we're going to dive into that topic. Before we get started, a quick shout out to Dr. Bradley Nelson and iHeartRadio, and to our audience and our fans. Thank you for your support. Please do not forget to like and subscribe before you leave today. David, it's so good to have you here. You're getting over a bit of a cold, but you still showed up. I love it. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and hopefully, I'm not too nasal.
Too nasally. You know what I always find whenever I have a cold or I'm sick, I get less nervous about things because my body's like sick and I have this like don't care attitude. And I remember that I had a job interview one time and I was sick, so sick. I had a really bad cold, but I went anyway and I knocked that interview out of the park because I just had this like don't give a crap attitude because my body was sick. I don't know if you can relate to that.
Well, yeah, there are times when your body tells you one thing and you're sort of in a zone and everything else just happens around you. So, yeah,
Yes,
it makes
it actually
sense.
helped me that day. I got the job.
Cool.
Oh my gosh. So, David, let's talk about the resume. When did you first realize that it really doesn't tell the story about a person?
Well, it's interesting because I think when I did my first resume, when I graduated with my doctorate and I had to put a resume together, um, I struggled with, like you, like everybody, to figure out what goes in, what doesn't go in, how to word it, how to proofread it. And back in the horse and buggy days when I did this,
Yeah,
I
before
had to,
AI days.
well, it was before even word processing. So you had
Right.
to
Yeah.
take it and get it professionally typed up, and then you had to get really expensive paper and print 500 of them and hope you use all 500 at some time. And you couldn't change it, customize it specific to the job posting or the job you were going to be interviewed for. You
Right.
could do that. You could do a little bit of that in the cover letter if you send a cover letter, but
Right.
if you didn't do all that, so things have it's evolved exponentially, the whole
That's an
process.
interesting point, actually. I never thought of that. Like back in your day, I'm not aging you, but you literally had one shot and you had the
You
same
had
resume over and over again.
Right. And if you wanted to create two resumes, then it was twice the expense because you had to get it printed twice and typeset twice and proofread twice. And God forbid there should be a spelling error because there was always those that when they see a spelling error, even today, they're going to disqualify the resume. So you didn't want to
Yeah.
run that risk. And then about 2 or 3 years into working with organizations on recruiting, I came to the realization that they're fabrications. I won't call them lies. They're fabrications on resumes to
Yeah.
enhance one's visibility. And
Yeah.
then what I realized was when my son graduated university, while he was at university, he had done something very interesting at Queen's University, not Queen's, at Western. The local school district was having problems finding monitors for lunchtime for the schools. And because of budget cuts, they were cutting after school programs. So he took his fraternity and said, we're going to volunteer and go into the community and we're going to set up a schedule and everybody in the fraternity has to abide by it. And we're going to do after school programs or we'll do lunch monitoring. And then it
Okay.
made the local newspaper, it made the local television, and everybody was very proud of it. And then he told me that 5 or 6 of his fraternity brothers put that on their resume as if they did it.
Oh, okay.
So they claim that it's their, you know, moment of glory.
Right.
And he had no problems with that. I had a problem with it, but he had no problems with it. And then I began to realize there was a lot of things on resumes that probably are exaggerated, that
Yeah.
are not necessarily even true. And then I started doing research on it, and now it is expected by hiring managers and by recruiters that about anywhere from 50 to 65% of what's on resumes is questionable.
Yeah.
So going into an interview and using a resume, there's going to be a question about it. And plus the fact if the person, the hiring manager, the recruiter is really diligent at their work, they're going to read the resume and they might ask you an in-depth question to explain something that isn't really your experience or your knowledge base. And you're going to get caught in that dilemma of how do I get out of this?
Yeah.
So, you know, honesty is the best policy, I guess, but it's something that people seem to avoid. And there's little signs that people have that tell you there's not truth in that resume. For instance, they'll put down, I worked at this company from 2015 to 2019, but they won't tell you the month that it was. So you're not saying what is going on there. And then there might be a gap in the resume and people try to cover it up. And if you look on LinkedIn, and I've seen this with people I know, people on LinkedIn who left their job 6 months ago, according to LinkedIn, are still working there
Right.
because they don't want to, people have a tendency to hire people who are currently employed.
Yeah.
There's this negative connotation that if I am not currently working, therefore there's a stigma with that, therefore they're not going to interview me, therefore I'm not going to be employed. So I got to fake it that I'm currently employed.
Yeah,
And
because there's
the other
a
thing
there's a
that,
stigma that it's a mental health issue that someone maybe isn't able to work right now, and people want to hire someone that is reliable and able to do the job, right? So yeah,
right,
there's so many lies on resumes. I mean, you can make yourself sound so good, but how do
yeah.
you write a resume to stand out then? In this world of so much competition, like it becomes a little bit of a challenge, no?
Well, it's even worse because with the invention of resume scanning systems, the resume scanning system is an AI system that looks for keywords.
Yeah.
So people have gotten that trick. So unlike the dark ages, when you had to send one resume in and you had no choice, now with word processing and AI generation and everything else, you can customize every resume you send out to the company that you're sending it to their posting, job posting. So the trick is, and if people aren't doing it, they should be doing it. The trick is you find those keywords or those key attributes that they're looking for, that skill and knowledge, and you put those words in there, and you're going to have your resume highlighted. Once they read your resume, then hopefully that's reflected in your resume and they're going to call you in. So the other part, which I find most difficult, is what differentiates people is their behaviors.
Mm.
It's not their skill and knowledge. Their skill and knowledge says to you they can do the job, but they might not do it for you. So there's a difference between can do and will do. So if a good resume was written, the resume is going to show the hiring manager that I have the behaviors that cause me to do the job. So
Right.
they should include how I executed that job. The problem is AI is not capable of reading behaviors. So
Right.
therefore, it's not going to miss that and only look at those keywords. But if you get past that, you have the keywords that identified you, then by having how you did the job buried in there in two or three sentences, or two or three bullet points, then you're going to have an advantage because people are hired for their skill and knowledge, they're hired for their education, they're promoted for their success, and they're fired for their interpersonal behaviors. And
Right.
so getting the job is only the first step. And
Yeah.
the other part, so resume writing is becoming a more of an art than it is a science,
Yeah.
because it's how do I manipulate the words so the person reading this or scanning this says, I have the skill and knowledge. And now that's the other problem. The world now is turning to skills, returning to skills. That's what
Right.
got people in the difficulties in the 50s, 60s, and 70s when people were hired for skills and then found out there was turnover, there were problems because they were ignoring the behaviors. And
Right.
so in the 90s and in the beginning of the 2000s, people started to focus on behavioral interviewing and focus on what are the behaviors that come out.
Yeah.
Now, that seems to be going away, coming back to recreating the problem we once had. So there needs to be a balance for those who are interviewing on having that in there. But if I'm writing a resume and want to be interviewed, I will stand out if I can put in my resume not only the work skill and knowledge I have, but how I apply that skill and knowledge. Now, that makes the resume a little longer. I remember my other son was doing his MBA and they were in a process of writing their resumes. And he had worked for a while, he had done other things. Um, and so I was working with him and putting his resume together. And he said, no, the professor said, your resume can be no more than one page.
Yeah. I've heard
And
that too.
so
I heard it to be simple, to the point, easy to read, bullet points. So there's no, like, it becomes overwhelming when it's really, really long, is what I've been told.
right. And that's what people, I think that's a misconception because, I mean, people who read these resumes say they look at it for anywhere than 30 seconds to maybe a minute, minute and a half. So that's
Right.
how they can go through hundreds of resumes very quickly.
Yeah.
But, if I'm scanning it on a computer and I'm just, scrolling it, making it 2 pages is not a big deal. But also making it one page and using 9.5 point font makes it hard for me to read it.
Yeah.
So,
That's true.
and that's what they were doing back then. He was blowing up the margins, so there was almost no margins, and using lower font and using less spacing in order to give it a little bit of white space and to make it look nice. But it didn't really capture who he was.
Yeah.
And the resume is nothing more than a calling card,
Mm.
and it's to get you in the door. And you're absolutely right in what you said earlier. Once you're in the door, that resume doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
It is a guideline. When I teach hiring managers to um, conduct interviews, I always say in the beginning, refer to something on the resume to give the message to the candidate that you know who they are and that you've read the resume and you're being respectful, and refer to something on the resume to start the conversation and use that conversation maybe to validate any of the skill and knowledge, like where they used it, how they've used it, etc. And then transition to a behavioral. Does the person have the behaviors that fit our culture? Do they fit our values? And if they have both, and that was highlighted to me once many years ago when I was working with Thomas Cook, the financial part that does the uh, foreign exchange transactions at airports and city centers, et cetera. And I was observing these people and writing their behavioral profile and their profile, and I realized that they rely on different currencies to have different colors, except for the US. And they actually don't go for the 5 note or the 10 note. They actually know that the brown is five and the green is 10 for that currency. And they have this all worked out because it's faster to pull it and not to actually look at the currency. And then when they count it out, they double check it. I also
Okay.
realized that when there were computer technology issues or the power would go out, that they had to very quickly calculate foreign exchange in their head.
Mm-hmm.
So what we did is we set up, there were two steps. The skill and knowledge you needed was being able to understand currency colors, and you had to be able to do math. If you were colorblind, you couldn't do the job. So, and if you couldn't pass the math test within 90 seconds, you couldn't do the job.
Yeah.
So that was a skill and knowledge test. And that would either say you can go to the interview or couldn't. Because once they were in the interview, it was about, do they have the behaviors to do the service properly?
Yeah.
And
And
it was
sometimes
fascinating.
that is fascinating. And it's interesting because sometimes you think that someone, by their appearance, you judge them, aren't going to do a good job at certain things. And then they end up knocking it out of the park. And it all comes down to the values, like you talk about. In my 20s, I applied for this job because it was really high paying and it was coating sewer pipes. So I am a young lady. I'll be honest, I knew nothing about sewer pipes. But I knew that I had the drive and the dedication to work from home and that I could have the self-discipline to do so. So I asked them to give me a chance. And there was two of us. There was two candidates. One of them was super nerdy. She was really book smart. And I'm really book smart, but I'm also extroverted and outgoing and more of a social character. And in my 20s, I was a little wild. Um, but they hired both of us on, and I knocked it out of the park because I was able to sit there, I was able to learn it, and I was able to do the job. And I made a lot of money doing it, but nobody bet that I would be the one that they would keep. They all put their money on the other girl, but she couldn't do it because her values were different. So I had zero qualifications for this job. But because I was dedicated and had the work ethic, I was able to do it and do it really, really well.
Well, you also had the physical attribute to be able to do it. You probably didn't complain about it and probably didn't get tired when maybe she got tired, but you
Yeah.
also had the behaviors that you fit in with the crew and
Yeah.
they liked you and they didn't necessarily like her. And that's where the behaviors kicked in. And that's what differentiates everybody. I always ask hiring managers, and I ask employees, why do you think you were fired? Why were you let go? And they would boil it down to, I didn't get along. Well, there was a
Yeah.
behavior through questioning, there was a behavior. We once did a study with 1,500 employees that had been let go, and we contacted them after they had a job. And when we contacted them, we asked, why did you leave your last job? What was the reason that you felt there was a necessity to leave the last job? And then we would ask their manager from their last job why they let them go to see if there was a match.
Okay.
83% was because of behavior.
Okay.
And
So
so when you
it's
know, the for the hiring manager, if you don't get into that behavior interviewing, you're going to hire somebody who can do the job, but nobody gets along with. You're going to hire
right.
somebody who does a job but doesn't live the culture of the organization. And that's going to cause a ripple effect, which is so negative among the employees that it impacts morale, productivity, retention. So there's a for the person who's doing the the putting out their resume. I also tell when I was teaching uh, final year students organizational behavior and finance, they always thought when they began the course, it was kind of like, why are we taking a course on behaviors? What
Yeah.
about finance and numbers and spreadsheets and interesting things? And by the end of the course, they realized this was really an interesting course. But I also worked with them on what their values were, their behaviors, and said, you're going to leave your first job because you don't get along. And you're going to have the courage to do what your parents didn't do, and you'll leave because you're
Right.
going to go home and live with your parents until you find a new job. And they
Yeah.
kind of laughed. They said, yeah, we'll do that. And I said, look at the company values. And when they ask you for questions, ask them for an example of when those values were lived or violated.
Right.
And they said half the time the hiring managers didn't even know what the company values were.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
said, and then I get my students would write me on LinkedIn years later saying, you were right. I left two jobs because I didn't get along with people or they didn't get along with me. I should have looked at the values. I finally picked a job where I'm getting along. I love it. And it's really about my fit to the behaviors of the organization. So having a resume out there, being honest in it is really
Right.
important. And the other
Yeah.
thing is on resumes people don't understand, especially those in Canada, is that you don't have to reveal certain things. If they
Oh,
ask you, if they ask you for, do you have a university degree? All you have to do is say yes. You don't even
mm,
have to say what university it's from. And if you put the university, don't put the year of graduation because
why?
it's not relevant. All right.
Okay.
You can put your major down if you want, but your major is probably in psychology or something which is not relevant to the job you're applying for. So just put down the university. You don't have to put it down what the dates are. And the reason you don't have to put down what the university is because that's a ground for prejudice. Certain people, when they see certain universities, will say, that's a good place. And certain people will say, that's a bad place. The same way universities will see you graduated from such and such high school in, northern Manitoba, and versus the other candidate who graduated from one of the better high schools in the greater Toronto area, and they're going to pick the guy or gal who came from Toronto. So they've done away with a lot of knowing what high school you came from. Well, that then translates back to your degree. And plus the fact, ageism is a thing. There's a lot of prejudice built in. I was just reading an article in the uh, NPR's website about a study that people with names that sounded like they were black or brown people were not picked up to be interviewed as well as people who were white, had so-called Caucasian names. And the
Right.
CBC did a study years ago at in University of British Columbia with Asian students who they sent out resumes exactly the same, one with their actual name on it, Asian name, and one with an Anglo name on it. And the ones with the Anglo name got interviewed almost twice as often as those same resume, same person who went in for the interview. So there's
Wow.
a lot of things that maybe you're putting on the resume that is leading to somebody having a suspicion about you.
Mm,
And so you got to be really careful about be honest and be yourself. Because why would you want to work for a company that when you got there, you realize this was not a good place for me to work? And then you have to
yeah.
go look for another job because looking for a job is harder than having one.
Well, let's talk about this next point is that I can guarantee you 90% of people who are hiring will look up the person on social media these days. And
Oh, yeah.
so, how important is it to monitor what you're putting out there on social media? Because I remember I was working at a law firm, and our assistant who looked after the front desk. The night before, she posted photos of herself out having fun at a bar. And she called in sick that morning, and that was immediately she got fired. And social media can really highlight different parts of us. Even if we don't think we're putting out that image, people judge us based on what we're putting out there. So, how important is social media
Well,
these days?
yeah, my nephew defriended me on Facebook because he was underage and had pictures on Facebook of him drinking, et cetera, et cetera. And he wanted to go in, he was studying to be a chef. And I said, well, if a restaurant sees that you're an underage drinker, they're going to figure you're going to serve underage drinkers. So why are you doing that? And he got so pissed off, he just defriended me.
No,
Became
well,
a chef.
you called a spade, so he
Yeah.
didn't get mad. He was exposed.
Well, he was exposed. He was mad. Um, he's no longer in the culinary business. He's found out it was not for him, but he was very good at it, but he left it. The fact is that people look on LinkedIn and they look on Facebook, they'll look on Instagram, they'll look on TikTok. Your media footprint is going to be examined, even though technically it's not something that should be done.
Yeah.
And those who have been fired because of what they put on non-professional websites have gone to court, and the courts are all over the place in how they decide on that. There's no
Okay.
straightforward answer on that. In Australia, firefighters were complaining about their fire chief, and the court ruling was, well, they did this on their personal computers on time that were off. They were expressing an opinion, and they had to get their job back.
Okay.
Other places, the courts have said, no, you lost your job because you said something which violated the code of conduct within the organization. And even though it was off hours, you still lost your job. So,
Right.
social media is wonderful. People love it. You get good cartoon, bits with cats and dogs and infants and all that other good stuff. And you have a good chuckle. But if you're looking for a job, it's going to come and haunt you because it doesn't never go away. And
Yeah.
there's always a way of finding it. And so I would suggest to people to clean up if they're looking for a job, clean up their presence on social media, make it private, do something, but don't have things on there that might offend an organization because you don't know who that organization is when you're going into to interview with them. You don't
Yeah.
know, you know, they might be an organization that has a more religious bent,
Hmm.
and you put something up there that is suspicious to them. And so suddenly you're not getting an interview. You're wondering why, because you were, quote, a perfect fit for the job.
Yeah.
Uh, you got to be careful. Social media is something which has caused a lot of problems.
Yeah. Well, I know that in the past there's been instances where honestly, I feel, and this is my personal opinion, that I didn't get certain positions because I didn't have the relationship with the boss that someone else did. And that's what's frustrating about the resume and credentials is that sometimes the people who actually are the best for these jobs aren't getting them because of relationships and what you talked about, coming down to people liking them and people wanting them around or having a relationship with people. And so I remember being so frustrated when I was younger with resumes because I wasn't either getting the job or wasn't getting called in. And then what I started doing is I started delivering them in person. Even if it said apply online only, I would still make the effort. I would go in the morning and I would introduce myself and I would actually ask if I could speak to the manager just to say hi because I felt like if they could like just meet me and get a sense of my energy that might give me the upper hand. And it worked in some cases, and in some cases it didn't. But I
Well,
find it really hard these days, especially because everything is done online. So if there's a job posting, these organizations are going to get hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes sent to them in their email. So how do you even begin to stand out these days?
okay, so as you raised two things. One is I want to handle real quickly is on credentials. People have a way of checking credentials. And there are cases. I was doing consulting work at the University of Notre Dame, and the coach that they hired was a high profile coach, had put on his resume that had a university degree because he figured that he was going to Notre Dame. He better have a university degree. He was fired 3 weeks on the job because they found out he didn't have a university degree. Uh,
Okay.
there was a person in New Zealand that was hired from Vancouver to be the head of their transit organization, saying he was the head of the transit organization in Vancouver. They never checked that. And a tourist who happened to read the newspaper that day wrote to the organization and said, this person was never the head of transportation, and he lost his job. And there
Wow.
are so many. I mean, if there's the movie Catch Me If You Can. That's a
Oh
true
yeah, yeah,
story. Like there are a lot of people out there that aren't the people you think they are and don't have the degree. So be honest about it. Otherwise, you're going to lose your job instantly. And it's an immediate grounds for
Especially
dismissal.
these days. These days, there's cameras and people everywhere.
Yes. So now here's the thing. You want to get a job, I would say find the companies, the area you want to work in, and find the companies that you feel have the environment and are doing things the way that you want them done. And use LinkedIn to connect with people in that organization in jobs that you want to apply for. Whether you're going to be an engineer, whether you're going to be a researcher, whether it's marketing, and connect with them as an interested party. And then look to see if they're posting anything like, we're having this problem or we're doing this or this is coming up, and respond to those things with
Oh, that's
what
smart.
you think are answers. Then, if they are, the person writes back to you, and then you say, "Oh, by the way, if you see there might be a posting, if you're looking for somebody in this field, excuse me, then you're interested in that job. Now you've
Yeah,
built a relationship with them.
right.
They already know you. Not they know you virtually, but they know you and they're comfortable with you. So one way is to network inside the company you want to get into through LinkedIn or other professional organizations and get to know them. Then, if let's say there's a conference coming up that's in your town or that you can get to that this person's going to, say, listen, I'm not going to the conference because my company's not paying for it or whatever, but I'd really like to meet you. Let me buy you a coffee for 5 minutes. And
Yeah.
you connect with them in person that way, and then you build a relationship. And then it might take you a little longer, obviously, to get the job you want, but you get the job you want, not the job that pays the bills. Because there's a difference between having a job that just pays the bills and having a job that fulfills your passion. And
100%. And it's gonna you're gonna act differently, you'll hold yourself differently. The passion's gonna come across differently. I'll tell you a quick story. I was working at a law firm and I absolutely hated my job. It was the people, the culture, everything about it. It was disgusting. And it was one of my first legal jobs. I was in my early 20s and I used to smoke back then. So I went out this big tall building in Winnipeg and I went for a cigarette break, and there was another guy outside, and he was having a cigarette too. And we ended up chatting. He was working in the banking industry at this bank that was in the same building. And we just started talking, and I told him my story, and he ended up offering me a job in a different industry just because we started building this relationship and I had no experience. So it came down to being friendly, being open, being curious, asking questions. It wasn't about the job at all. It was because I got my foot in the door because of exactly what you're saying. Is you're building a relationship with someone in that organization who's going to go to bat for you because they know you.
yeah, back in the dark ages, going back then, you used to
You make
find out
yourself
about
sound like a
ads.
dinosaur,
Yeah, I
prehistoric.
am. Yeah, if you go back to the dark ages, and there used to be these things called want ads, and
What? Sorry,
the
can you
want
say
ads
that
had a
again?
job section, and they always said that 90% of the jobs that were available weren't even advertised.
Yeah.
And it was about building networks in companies that you wanted. I still believe a lot of good jobs will be created by people based on having a network, and I'd like to hire that person. And we have a job or we have a potential job coming up, and I want to hire them. The other thing for people who are changing careers, and I changed careers from education to corporate consulting, and my career counselor at the time said something that was brilliant. He said, they're going to question you because you don't have any experience in this field. So if you find a place you're really interested in, tell them you'll volunteer as an intern for 3 months,
Mm,
unpaid. So you can get, it's a win-win because you get to write on your resume that you've had 3 months on the job doing this, and they get the work done without having to have anybody pay for it.
right.
He said that because there was a friend of his who was a priest who left the priesthood and was going in, wanted to work in um, the culinary business, and he got a job at the Toronto Yacht Club because he volunteered to do it. And 5 years later, he was managing the yacht club. So
Wow.
that's why now I tried that with one job that I thought was going to be really interesting, where they were complaining I didn't have any corporate experience. And they looked at me and laughed and says, well, we want to hire you, but we can't let you work for free. So we're going to pay you.
Oh,
And
wow.
that started my career transition. But that's another thing you can do. If you're looking for a job and you don't feel you have the experience and you have the ability because you have some money or you're living at home or whatever, then volunteer to do the work for a little while. And if you do a good job, be surprised. They'll probably give you a retro pay and hire you. So
Wow.
give it, do something that's different. And here's another thing, which I always say to people, if you're looking for a job, you get the interview, and this sounds really crazy, write a handwritten note, put a stamp on it, and send it to the person that interviewed you and thank them. Because when they get that piece of mail, open it up, and they're saying, I never got a piece of mail other than, these flyers and notices from my bank.
Yeah.
They're going to remember that. And it's handwritten. Now, my granddaughter, who's in grade 5, who's learning cursive and cursing that she has to learn cursive, might not be able to write a handwritten note when she's looking for a job, but most people still can. So use that to your advantage. Do something that makes you stand out.
Yeah, that's so important. So you've worked with so many firms and governments across 5 continents. What is one universal truth about people that you think keeps showing up?
That's interesting. People show up. It's the fact that, do I get along with that person? Do I have a behavior that fits that person's characteristics? It's not a matter of bias. It's a matter of, can I get along? If I have the same values and the same sort of attributes, therefore it's safe to disagree with that person. It's not about, this person is a certain religion, this certain is a certain background, they went to a certain university. That's not it. It's about, can I get along with this person? Do I have the behaviors? Do I have a similar value set? And am I flexible in listening to that person? And most people don't ask the right questions. And when they ask the right questions, they don't necessarily listen enough. So
Yeah.
listening is a key.
So I guess the takeaway is relationships are key these days, and I guess they always have been. So even though a resume these days probably takes you less than 60 seconds to make, the real work comes in connecting with the culture and the community to make yourself stand out as an individual. I think that's the hardest thing these days is standing out as an individual because of the noise and everything is online. Would you agree that that's the way that you stand out these days is to do something different against the grain?
Yeah. Um, the best way of explaining that is when I went to the Ben and Jerry's factory head office in New Hampshire. And as you go through the tour, there's a showcase of how people have sent them resumes that were written on cakes, resumes that were written in different ways on different materials because it fit the craziness of Ben and Jerry's.
Yeah,
And those are people that were very creative. I don't know if they got the job or not, but it was really cool to see that. So, yeah, you got to find a way of standing out and you have to be honest. If you don't know something, say you don't know something because
yeah.
it's, fake it till you make it. It's not going to work to get the job. And it's something which you first want to make sure you can land on both feet at the same time and you can hit the floor running. And if you have apprehensions, those are going to show through. So be honest, be upfront, and even the introvert, extrovert, no matter what you are, you need to be able to say, this is who I am, this is what I've done, this is what I know and don't know, and this is what I'm willing to learn. Most hiring managers, unfortunately, don't have that concept of transferability of, oh, they did this in this field, but it's similar to this. And most want, little round pegs to go in round holes. And so
Yeah.
you've got to, I'll give you one example. A friend of mine was, we were out for dinner and the couple, she had just finished her degree in library science and she was going in for a job interview and she was very apprehensive because she hadn't she had a 20-year gap in her resume. And she said, I'm going in against all these younger people that have continuity in their resume. I got this 20-year gap. And, what am I supposed to do? And I said, well, wait a second. What are the attributes, the behaviors, the characteristics that they're looking for in a librarian? And they're about time management, about getting things done on time, about organizing things. And I said, so you have three daughters, middle school through high school, two in high school. You take them to different events every morning before school. You pick them up or get them to other events after school. You volunteer for two organizations. You organize things. You do this, this, and this. So when they ask you a question on, are you organized? Don't say yes. Say, let me explain to you how I'm organized. Let
Mm,
me explain to you how I juggle three teenage girls, getting them to school on time and getting them to participate in different events.
right.
Well, she got the job offer at the interview.
Wow. Yeah. That is time organization at its finest right there.
Yeah. And so don't give a yes or no answer when you're at the interview. Give an explanation of how you use that skill or knowledge, how you did it, not what you did. What you did is on the resume. How you do it is missing. And so do that. And the other thing which I would warn you with, they ask these innocuous questions which don't mean anything, like, what are you going to do in 5 years? Or what's
Oh,
your
I hate
strength
those
and weakness?
questions.
Yeah, what's your strength and weakness? And I actually went on AI, asked that question, how do you answer that? And then I had an interview training course. I use that. People really like the answer. And I say, well, that's an AI answer. People are going to be using AI to prep for interviews, and they're going to come in with these pre-recorded answers in their mind, and they don't tell you what they actually do. There's no real meaning of what your strength and weakness is because, what's your strength? What's your weakness? I work really hard. I put in too much effort. I have no life. What's your weakness? What's your strength? I work really hard. So, you can turn your strength into weakness, your weakness into a strength. You can flip them around, you can play with them. They're meaningless. Try to answer the question in a way that shows who you are, not the answer that you think they want.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about the work that you do and where people can find you.
Well, the work I do is usually with corporate leaders on values and behaviors and organizational culture and applying that to different aspects of talent management, not only hiring, constructing behavioral interview training and processes, but also performance management, succession planning, etc. And my new book, which is Selecting the Best, is out, which would be good for any hiring manager, any recruiter. But as we talked about today, it'd be really advantageous for those who are looking for a job to know what the hiring manager is looking, what they're doing sort of behind the curtain. So it's really for those looking for a job as well as those that are looking to hire people. They can reach me at my website, which is sagltd.com here in Toronto. And that's about it.
Okay, so what brought your passion to life? Like why were you called to this type of work?
I really felt that I wanted to make a difference in the way people are treated. And that's why I was in education. I was in education focusing on, you know, adolescents to have honest dialogue about difference of opinions and different perspectives on the world and looking for their moral, help them find their moral center. And when I got into the corporate world, I focused on behaviors, and eventually that evolved to working on what are the behaviors of the culture, the values of the organization, and how do those values make a difference? And what's the impact on an organization when they have people that are aligned with the values, aligned with the purpose, the vision, and those companies are those that are always outperform those that the alignment is not there. So my passion has always been around social justice and doing the right thing, not the easy thing, and helping people understand what their alignment is, what their values are, and how can they understand their values.
Yeah, what's funny is every time I go to a Starbucks, or every time there's a couple other places that I go to, the culture is so upbeat and friendly. Every time I walk in, there's maybe been one or two experiences where it hasn't been that way, but the staff have been so friendly, so much fun. I don't want to leave. I want to just hang out there all day because
That's
the
what's,
culture is just so upbeat.
yeah,
And it makes such a big difference. If there's one person in there that has a negative attitude, or you can feel that they don't belong there, it's very, very obvious. And I truly agree with you. I think that's what makes businesses thrive.
yeah, it does. And that's what, Starbucks, when they were founded and started to expand, their whole focus was it's a meeting place. It's a place, to enjoy coffee as well as to hang out, so to speak. And it was a fun place. And you really see that without naming another name. Well, if you go to that other Canadian coffee shop, it's in and out. It's not about customer service. It's about
Yeah.
speed of service and not necessarily
Yes.
accurate service. So it really makes a difference. And that
Yeah. And
is,
I'll pay $10 for a coffee for the experience.
well, or just being treated nicely.
Just being treated nicely, or getting
Yeah,
my
I was
name
working.
written on the cup, and people asking me how my day is going.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that I work with Starbucks and was one of my clients. And when they were expanding into China, because the Chinese personality wasn't like that to set that environment up, the I was friendly with, and I knew the head of human resources for the Asian area. And when I was going to China, she said, "We're having a real problem there getting the atmosphere to be just as you were explaining it." And when I was in Shanghai, I happened to see a Starbucks, so I went in, and their atmosphere was almost perfectly aligned with what they wanted. So I wrote to her and said, "Well, there's one place in China that's working, and you could
Wow.
feel it, and more people were attracted there." So you're absolutely right. And you look at that at Home Depot, you look at that at there's a lot of places where it really works. You look at that at, the people who work in Patagonia. That there's a lot of places where that alignment is really there, and people know it, and they live with it. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. It is interesting how much people will pay for that whole entire experience. So, what a beautiful conversation. Times are changing. It's becoming harder and harder to get jobs. It's becoming harder and harder to stand out. Thanks for being on here and for talking about work culture and how to stand out in this new world. I'll always remember going to Staples and buying this really thick paper when I was writing resumes, and it took me days to create my resume and type it up and spell proof it and then print it out on this really thick paper that was a little bit of a different shade. And I just remember having this folder full of them, and it was such an it was almost like a, I don't know, it was a fun experience to me. It was, nowadays I don't feel like people will get that same experience, and it's
No,
a
they
little
won't.
bit different. But we appreciate you coming on here and sharing your expertise. It was a really great conversation. Do you have any last minute thoughts before we leave?
No, not really. It's just that, if people would focus on the truth and speak the truth, I think that they first have to understand what their truth is. They get that across at the interview, they'll probably get the job.
Amazing. Thanks again for being here. And to our audience, try and stand out. Get involved with the cultures, get involved with the people at the places you want to work. Yeah, it's a different world these days. But thanks for tuning in. Please do not forget to like and subscribe. Bye.